Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We risk losing everything. Utah's top elections official worries about threats vigilantes pose to voting. Harris supporters brave threats, theft, and vulgarity in southern Utah's Trump country. And the Salt Lake County Council gives its final approval to Jazz owner Ryan Smith's taxpayer-backed sports district. Joining me today on the program are Salt Lake Tribune State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. Emily, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thank you. Reporter Mark Eddington joins us. Mark, thanks.
It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you. And reporter Jordan Miller joins us. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Let's start with Emily Anderson-Stern. There were a couple of events featuring the Lieutenant Governor, Deidre Henderson. She gave a speech at University of Utah, right? And then you interviewed her, right, Emily? I want to start with this. You reported, I don't know when this happened, it was last week or recently, there was a suspicious package containing white powder addressed, was it to Deidre Henderson herself?
Yeah, so the package was addressed to Lieutenant Governor Henderson, her office. This happened September 20th, toward the end of September, and the FBI intercepted it in Reno. It had some suspicious white powder in it and was signed by, quote, the United States Trader Elimination Army. Now, these kinds of packages throughout that week had been being sent to top elections officials in states around the country. I had been watching her throughout the week tweet about this, about, what a problem it was that elections officials were being threatened. And then the package came to her, or was addressed to her.
And so I guess just for those who don't know, the lieutenant governor under our system is the top elections official, right? County clerks, administer this locally. Lieutenant Governor Henderson talked about the fact that in this new environment, a fair number of county clerks are not running for re-election. They're quitting.
Well, that actually was some reporting that we did a couple of years ago where we dug into, county clerks who were running for election in 2022. And there were so many contests where, there were not any incumbents running, which in county clerk races, that's not super common. You'll see people who are county clerks for decades. This is a position where you have to build a lot of expertise, obviously become very familiar with voting systems, and you have a lot of other responsibilities in the county. And we saw, very few of Utah's county clerks wanted to run again. And this was something that back then the state elections director pointed out as, a huge issue and something that he attributed to the changing climate around administering elections in the United States, and including in Utah, where elections officials are, receiving threats, and where a lot of people are doubting the integrity of U.S. elections, and then they're turning to their local officials and harassing them for that. I will say, for people who do have doubts or questions about elections, county clerks are typically the first people to want to answer your questions, to want to give you a tour of their the technology they use to count votes and to run elections. But it just became a lot for many of the state's elections officials after the 2020 election.
You included an interesting survey in your reporting, Emily. Brennan Center for Justice did a survey of local election officials. I assume this is state nationwide. 38% reported experiencing threats, harassment, or abuse. So this is apparently it's ongoing nationwide.
Yeah, this has just become a huge issue, and most of it started after the 2020 election, and some of the false rumors and in some cases lies that some supporters of former President Trump spread, and as they tried to explain his electoral loss. But it's continued to happen over the last 4 years. And as we have another general election coming up, those threats are back on the rise.
I want to read Lieutenant Governor's quote. This is from her speech, University of Utah. She says, "Over the past few years, our election system has been overwhelmed by demands and disruption from individuals who are best described as election vigilantes, who claim to value the Constitution and rule of law while violating both." And I don't think it's lost on her that many or most of these folks are from her same party.
Right. And, this was something I talked to her about when I interviewed her. We were talking about some of the threats that elections officials face. And, I brought up like that many of these threats were coming from her party and asked her, her thoughts on that. And she expressed her disappointment. She said she'd like to see more people stand up against them within her party, including elected officials in the state. And, I asked her, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of these rumors stem from President Donald Trump's loss in 2020. And so I asked her, in this upcoming election, will you be making an endorsement to, support the Republican nominee for president? And she said she won't. And a lot of that is because she has an issue with Donald Trump, who's, at the top of the party right now, spreading chaos and confusion, especially around elections.
You report that, is this outside her office? There's a miniature of a mural of Seraph Young Ford. Who's that?
So it's just inside the door to her office. So every
Okay.
time she walks out the door on the right-hand side, there's a little image of Seraph Young Ford. And if you've ever been to the Capitol or taken a tour of the Capitol, you've seen the original mural, the large size of this, but it's the first woman to ever legally vote in the United States. And that was in Utah. Now, even though women had the right to vote here in Utah pretty early, Congress passed a law taking away that right, and that was later given back when Utah ratified its constitution. But yeah, she has that picture of Seraph Young Ford casting her first ballot right next to the door of her office. Essentially, I think for many people who are in the Capitol, it serves as a reminder of the importance of voting rights. And that's something she talked about, the right to vote and the importance of it and how hard won it was for women in Utah in her speech yesterday. And, said that if some of the disorder around elections continues, as far as, people threatening elections officials, harassing elections officials, and in some cases, trying to sabotage the election process. She said that, all of those rights for everyone are at risk. Essentially saying that these threats and this harassment, even though it's targeted at elections officials, it's really targeted at voters and their right to participate in democracy.
Of course, Governor Cox has endorsed Donald Trump. That was a surprise to some of his supporters. You asked the Lieutenant Governor if she'll be making an endorsement. What did she say?
Yeah, she said she won't be making an endorsement for president because she has an issue with, Donald Trump's role in spreading some of this, some of the lies around, election systems and elections being fraudulent. She said she has a problem with that, and that she just doesn't see anyone who spreads those kinds of lies or falsities as doing anything good for the country. But yeah, it is an interesting move, given that Governor Spencer Cox in July said he would endorse President Trump. And, you know, in explaining that decision numerous times, he said essentially that he backed President Trump because he's hoping that by supporting him, he can have his ear and get him to maybe use a little bit more civil dialogue. And, you know, to quote the National Governors Association initiative, to essentially disagree better with people. But it surprised a lot of people because of how much the governor has criticized former President Trump, and because of some of the rhetoric that he's continued to use in this election cycle.
U.S. Lieutenant Governor, whether things have changed, right? Her predecessor is Governor Cox. He used to be the Lieutenant Governor. So you asked her if things have changed, threats increased, and also you asked her if they're more gendered, these threats.
Yeah. So Governor Cox was the Lieutenant Governor prior to Lieutenant Governor Henderson. You know, and so I was curious if she and the governor had compared notes as to their experiences. And she said, I mean, like Governor Cox was Lieutenant Governor when the COVID-19 pandemic began. And she said, you know, there were some difficulties there for him, but that a lot of these threats toward elections officials didn't really emerge until, you know, after the 2020 election, after January 6th. And she, you know, hadn't experienced these types of threats before. She had been an elected official before. She was a state senator, and had never seen anything like this. But, you know, she did say also that compared to other male elected officials who might be getting threats, you know, some of those threats look different for women. And statistically, elections officials across the country are more often than not women. And she said, you know, some of those threats end up being about, you know, like sexually assaulting these women, or they often look a little different than what men are experiencing.
You asked her about security, what they're doing to prepare for threats, you know, ahead of this coming election. She talked about what she's done in the past. I guess the implication is she might do this in the future. This gave me pause. In past elections, they've delivered PPE masks, gloves, Narcan. I guess they're worried about, you know, suspicious envelopes and other threats.
Yeah. So there was, and last year there were a number of pieces of mail delivered to elections officials across the country that had a fentanyl-laced substance in it. Similar, you know, to the piece of mail that was addressed to the lieutenant governor this year. But this one, after the powdery substance was tested, there was a fentanyl-laced substance. And so just, you know, as a precaution, in case a suspicious piece of mail came, the lieutenant governor's office made sure that county clerks throughout the state did have gloves and special equipment to handle mail in case there was a substance like fentanyl in it, and including Narcan if, you know, someone happened to get that fentanyl into their system. But yeah, they've had to take a lot of surprising security steps like that, just as some of these threats come in. Just, you know, for safety, and all the county clerks have had to receive training on how to identify suspicious packages, then how to handle them. And so it's really just, you know, something that's part of this new era, I guess, we're living in, where political criticism has escalated to criticizing the entire U.S. election system, and, you know, targeting whenever if a candidate loses, then targeting the folks who administer those elections in retaliation often.
You asked her several questions about vote by mail. You've done extensive reporting on this. We're running out of time for this segment, but I just wanted to ask you this. When you ask her about the people who, there are some people who have questions about how secure vote by mail is. What did the lieutenant governor say about that?
Well, essentially, whenever most Utahns trust vote by mail enough to use it. In the June primary, we found that around 97% of Utahns used the ballots they got in the mail. But she did say that whenever there are questions, go to the lieutenant governor's website. They have answers to frequently asked questions, but also reach out to your county clerk and see if they will explain how they count the ballots. And also you can follow your ballot as it arrives at the county clerk's office and as they're counting it. There are lots of systems in place to make sure your ballot's counted. And also, county clerks, like as I mentioned before, are always willing to talk with people and answer questions about how elections are run and votes are counted.
Well, interesting story, important, of course, as well as we head into the election here just about a month away. Emily Anderson-Stern, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
We'll head toward a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about this headline. Harris supporters brave threats, theft, and vulgarity in southern Utah's Trump country. We'll be talking with Salt Lake Tribune reporter Mark Eddington. You are listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. More following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We turn next to Salt Lake Tribune reporter Mark Eddington. Mark, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Mark, you cover southern Utah, and this story, we'll keep it with politics. Here's the headline. Harris supporters brave threats, theft, and vulgarity in southern Utah's Trump country. I want to read your opening sentence. They may be the stuff of rumors like Bigfoot or UFOs, but Democrats and Harris Walz supporters in heavily Republican Washington County actually exist, and they're making themselves seen and heard this election season. I guess my first question is that, we've gotten used to Trump flags and MAGA flags, etc. Are you seeing more of the Democrats' signs up this year than last time?
I am. It's surprising. Right in my own neighborhood, I have people putting up Harris signs, and of course more Trump signs are appearing over the last couple of days. But things like, one is a huge banner. Most of the Harris supporters put up signs that are a little smaller, but one of them put a huge banner up and 2 or 3 signs on their home. Another, just a few doors up from me, put veterans are not suckers and losers, and then Madam President, and so there's quite a few Harris signs. They're still outnumbered, but there's quite a few Harris signs that have surfaced over the last several weeks. So it seems to me there's a definite uptick of people that are supporting the Harris Walz, even though they're certainly heavily outnumbered.
So Washington County is indeed Trump country. We can prove that by how people voted the last few times. By what percentages? Yeah,
I think in the 2020 election, statewide, I believe Trump carried it by about 58, little over 58% of the vote. In Washington County, he got nearly 75%. In Iron County, he got a little over 76%. In Kane County, almost 72%. And in Garfield, he had a whopping 79%. And all those percentages were up from the 2016 election. For example, Washington in 2016, Trump got about 45% of little over 45% of the vote in 2016. In Washington County, he garnered 68.4% of the vote. Iron 64.8, Kane 64, Garfield 68.5%. So in the 2020 election, all those percentages for Trump went up. It remains to be seen what's going to happen in 2024. But I do see a definite uptick in support, for Democrats in general and for Harris Waltz in particular.
So you've been noticing, signs of both sides, maybe a few more signs for Harris this time around for the Democrat. You went out and talked to some people. Tell me a few of the people you talked to.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I knew there was a story here, and some of it had some incidents happen in my own neighborhood of incivility. And I know that incivility is, there's an undercurrent of incivility and political extremism that runs down here. But during election season, it seems to be a riptide that kind of sucks civility out to sea a little bit. But there were some episodes where there were some confrontations in my neighborhood, and I just thought there's a story here. And so I walk about 3 or 4 miles in the mornings, and some of the areas I walk, I would see signs up, and I thought it would be interesting, to talk to Harris supporters, but also Trump supporters, about, what they're experiencing and so forth. If they're getting any blowback, or, their signs are being vandalized, or, they're being criticized or threatened by neighbors and so forth. And, so I knocked on doors in a number of places, not just in my neighborhood or near my neighborhood, but tried to make it different areas in the county. And that wasn't always productive because a lot of people don't answer their doors. And I guess, they'll have no soliciting signs and they think you're selling something, but or they're just not home. But anyway, so I did get some Trump supporters, some Harris supporters. And whenever I'd talk to them, I would say, well, who else do you know that's, supporting Trump or Harris that might be willing to talk to me? So I kind of laced him in that way. Also called had the Democratic Party in Washington County that helped out with putting me in touch or giving me some names of people I could talk to. So I think I talked to about 25 people overall. And from the Trump supporters that I talked to, it really wasn't much of an issue because they're in the overwhelming majority. And so they feel, I think that, putting signs up and banners, whatever, they feel like they're in a safe space. But many of the Harris supporters I talked to definitely feel a little bit under siege. Some of them won't put banners up of any kind. They're worried about, for example, if they put them outside, they're worried about their car getting keyed or vandalism. So if they display them at all, they might display them, inside their living room window or kitchen window. They're, and they get a lot more blowback from neighbors. I think I mentioned about the one woman in the story, Fran, I believe is her name, that she had a neighbor, I guess. Fran's not LDS, but she had a neighbor who was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who's been trying to get her out to church. And when she displayed her Harris Waltz sign, this neighbor of hers, who's a Trump supporter, basically came to her and said the Book of Mormon teaches that, that when the majority of people support a wicked ruler, that, that country is ripe for destruction. And so she basically said, told Fran that if that by supporting Harris Waltz and all the evil they stood for, she was not only putting her family at risk, but also everyone else's across the nation. So anyway, got a lot of stories like that. I tried to use the strongest stuff, but it certainly is. It takes, when you're heavily outnumbered like that, it takes a degree of a little bit of bravery, I think, to signal your support to your neighbors and so forth.
There's one woman, Harris Waltz supporter. She says she doesn't want to be too out there, to proclaim her support too loudly, because she doesn't want her kids to be ostracized.
Yeah, that's Ellen, lives out in Hurricane, and she is a transplant. I'm trying to remember where now. I think from Phoenix. I might have that wrong, but anyway, yeah, she's she says she's very liberal, but she's a little reticent about being too forward with her political views. and putting signage out and so forth because she's worried how that'll be perceived. She's the out-of-town liberal and bringing her liberal ideas, to Hurricane, which is a very conservative community. In fact, they used to have a sign. I don't know if they still have it, but there used to be a sign that people would display that says "Don't Californicate Utah." But anyway, it speaks to the idea of some people, outsiders, bringing their ideas. And so she was worried about that and worried that some of her neighbors who are, predominantly members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints might ostracize her and maybe her kids wouldn't be invited out to play. And so she did, show her support. And she has a hat that signals her support in a very subtle way, I guess. And that is the hat has um, a comma on it, and then yeah, I can't remember what it says now.
I think it was a comma and then a la, L-A, right?
Yes,
So,
thank you. Yes,
Kamala, yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
had a senior moment there. Thanks,
Yeah.
Tom. That was her way of showing her support.
Mhm.
So, this is nothing new. I mean, Southern Utah has been a hotbed of very conservative politics, and in some cases, political extremism for a long time. People may not remember, but the city of Laverton, clear back in the early aughts, tried to pass an ordinance that made Laverton a UN-free zone and wanted to require anybody who lived there that did business with the UN to report that back and maybe register with the city, although I can't imagine anybody there that would do business with the UN. You have the city of Virgin nearby that tried to make it I think it was a misdemeanor. I don't think it was a felony, but if you didn't own a firearm, it was actually a crime. And they had to have the Utah Attorney General at the time, Mark Shurtleff, I believe, go down to him or tell him, hey, essentially, you can't do that.
Mhm. Yeah.
You have some examples there, and in Virgin they have a Lavoy Finicum Drive. The guy that was shot when they took over the bird refuge in Oregon, and he was gunned down when he was ostensibly reaching for a weapon. So he's lionized by some. So you have a number of people that took part in the January 6th insurrection in Tokerville and in Kanab and places like that. So it's an interesting political milieu or environment, if you will.
Mm. There's one incident that someone recounted to you that I guess they were camping out at Panguitch Lake, and
Yes,
some Trump supporters were flying a banner. I guess it said "Get rid of Joe," and these folks who are Democrats asked them to take it down, and they did.
They did, not initially. That was Stacy, who's pretty outspoken. Stacy Lee Chamberlain. She just goes by Stacy Lee, but she was there, and it said "Get rid of Joe," and it was a derogatory term for women, and she did tell them it was inappropriate. They did take it down eventually, but she made the point is if she went and displayed those kind of signage, on that these people were displaying, that it would have ignited, a firestorm, if you will. And there's a lot of really probably inappropriate signage. You have somebody, on Amazon, there's people that can basically, get a sign saying, Donald Trump 2024, and they drop an F-bomb, F your feelings. And there's just a number of signs like that that are inappropriate. And some of the Harris supporters feel if they were to respond in kind, that they would be, their lives, they would be threatened more than they already are. So it's an interesting environment, to be sure.
So apparently, according to your story, if you're looking for some civility in Washington County, you can maybe find it at Utah Tech University.
Yeah, Vince Brown, their political science professor, and I think he's over there. He's not over the department, but anyway, I guess they had a watch party, on the Trump Kamala Harris debate, and he said, that most of their students there tend to lean conservative. Many of them are Trump backers, but but that after the debate, that many of them felt like, other than a handful, that that Kamala Harris, despite the fact they were opposed to her, that she won the debate, and he seemed to think that there's a greater degree of civility, if you will, in the younger generation than there is, in the older generations. That they don't seem to be as rife with conflict as the millennials, and which is my generation, and some of the older generations, and they seem to be willing to discuss things and to maintain a sense of decorum and a sense of civility, and are able to discuss ideas rather than attack people. So he noticed that difference. He also doesn't think that, at least, this is anecdotal, but he doesn't feel like it's the incivility or the toxic political environment is as bad today as it was in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
4 years ago.
So, Mark, you end your story on a hopeful note. There's a woman who was, I guess, putting up signs, Harris signs. Trump supporters stopped by asking her how in the world could you support Harris, and they ended up having what she described as a spirited but polite exchange of views. So that's somewhat hopeful.
Yeah, it is. Even though most of the incivility just comes from the Trump backers, it'd be a mistake, I think, to characterize all Trump supporters as being uncivil. It's just that they're in the overwhelming majority, here. And so it stands to reason that most of it would be coming from that camp. But yeah, you're talking about, she's a second vice president for the Democratic Party here in Washington County. And she was putting up signs down there in downtown St. George. And sure, she had people hurl insults and so forth, but one guy actually stopped, and she said they had a very frank, spirited, but civil discussion about ideas. And she told him why she supported Harris, and he responded, why he supported Trump. And they talked for about 45 minutes, and ended agreeing to disagree. But it was a good exchange, and she felt like that was emblematic of of the kind of conversations that should be had when it comes to politics, as opposed to hurling insults and personal attacks and so forth. Rather, than talking about people in a very negative fashion, it's great to discuss ideas. So anyway.
Well, interesting story. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mark.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Reporter Mark Eddington from the Salt Lake Tribune. You're listening to Behind the Headlines. When we come back from a break, here's the headline. The Salt Lake City Council gives its final approval to Jazz owner Ryan Smith's taxpayer-backed sports district. Behind the Headlines is the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. We'll have more following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We turn next to Salt Lake Tribune reporter Jordan Miller. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, another step, this is a big one, for the proposed Salt Lake City Downtown Sports and Entertainment District. Salt Lake City Council voted 6-0 to give final approval. And I guess this is specifically approval for taxpayer dollars. How much money is going to go to the district now from the taxpayers?
Yeah, so this approval means that there's going to be a 0.5 percentage point sales tax increase. And I think it's going to come into effect sometime around the new year. So the tax commission is going to have a few months here between today's October 4th, and the end of the year to have a mechanism to put that 0.5 percentage point sales tax increase in place for the city. And it's going to funnel about $900 million into the sports district. So we had that approval, and we also had the approval for the participation agreement, which essentially outlines like, okay, we're going to do this at this point, and it's going to use this money. It just has a little bit more detail of what the process will look like, and what the city has approved for SCG to do.
So that's the public money. How much private money? How much from the Ryan Smith and his group?
Yeah, SCG has committed to spending at least $3 billion of its own money on the district. So they're looking forward to renovating the Delta Center, which some of the public money will go for that. And then we also have some reimagining of the blocks east of the arena as well. So they're hoping to put in like a plaza, I think, and a couple of other things like just to make that downtown core a true sports and entertainment cultural convention district.
So, as a part of this agreement, the Smiths Group has promised to keep the Utah Jazz and the newly acquired NHL hockey club downtown for 30 years. I guess that important that the city officials, if we're going to put in this money, those two franchises have to stay downtown.
Yeah, so that was part of the participation agreement. And if SEG decides to if the Jazz or the Utah Hockey Club move, they're going to have to pay pretty steep penalties. So for example, SEG would have to pay up to 125 million if either team leaves the arena in the first 15 years, or 250 million if both leave, with the penalties decreasing by about 16 million a year after that.
So we talked a bit about the public, parts of this. A big portion of that money, that 900 million, is going to retrofit the what are we calling Delta Center these days? Whatever that arena is.
I think it's still technically the Delta Center.
Okay.
But yeah, they're gonna do a lot of renovations that should begin as soon as this spring. And that's gonna result in so of course we have the hockey season and the NBA season, and they're gonna try and work around. So I think that the construction is gonna focus over the next 3 summers. But the construction could begin as soon as April for part of, I think, the North Bowl of the Delta Center. But we have more information online on kind of the phases that the Delta Center will go through and when each phase will start and what that'll look like for residents.
So, what is the SEG group going to do for their part of it? It's hotels, restaurants. What's going to happen?
Yeah, so one of the big benefits that the city has talked about is that there's going to be this public benefit fund, and that public benefit fund is going to come from a fee applied to tickets. So that fund will be able to go to a lot of different opportunities, and the SEG is also looking forward to having internship programs, job shadowing opportunities, workforce training and development, things like that. For folks who want to work in this district. So they're hoping to create a lot of jobs and help kind of reinvest city youth in this area. And they're also looking to do some subsidized tickets. And that public benefit fund can also go to homeless mitigation, public safety, public art, things like the Japantown revitalization, and affordable housing.
By the way, just parenthetically, a story a while back, viewers, you're in the middle of the city council authorized, I think they authorized higher skyscrapers as part of this, up to 50 stories, is it?
Yes. So essentially, one of the things that SEG was hoping for was to have higher skyscrapers downtown. And the city authorized that. Right now, I believe that the method it's going to go through is still through the Planning Commission, as do most buildings downtown. They have to go through the Planning Commission to get special permission if they want to build above a certain height. And SEG had initially asked for special permission to go through the city on that front, to have it kind of more an official based approval rather than going through the Planning Commission. And that hasn't been set in stone just yet, but could come in the development agreement, which is another document that's going to come out here soon. We have a lot of agreements here. So the development agreement is going to specifically outline, okay, here's the exact type of construction that SEG wants to do. We'll see how much detail is in there. But it's not like the participation agreement, where the participation agreement has more broad strokes. The development agreement should have more specifics on, okay, here's how big we actually want to build these buildings, that kind of thing. Here's their exactly what it's going to look like a little bit more specifically.
So to situate to where people can imagine where this is, so it's the Delta Center block and then a couple blocks to the west. Is that what we're talking about here?
It's the Delta Center block, and then it is a couple blocks to I think it's to, one second, let me double check because I have the map up, but it's a little bit hard to look at. So yeah, they're gonna have the Delta Center area, and then they're gonna have a couple blocks surrounding it. So it should be the blocks, like there's a block below South Temple and 100 South. So I think it's the two blocks actually directly east of the Delta
Okay.
Center.
Yeah.
So we have that block between South Temple and 100 South, with the Delta Center on the left, and 300 West or 200 West on the right. And then phase two is going to be, hopefully they're hoping to do something with the Salt Palace, which should be the block that's a little bit further to the right.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So there were people at this meeting spoke for and against. Let's take the pro first. Several people. Obviously, the city council's in favor. Legislators, University of Utah sent the president and a spokesperson. What are some of the things they're saying that why they think this is needed and they're in favor of it?
Yeah, so there was a state representative who spoke, and that state representative, it was Representative Stuart Barlow from Fruit Heights. He mentioned that they really need something great, legendary, something that will be here for hundreds of years. And they really want something to stimulate, educate the area, especially for kids. And partnerships like this, he said, are vital to that effort. So, a lot of people spoke around the same thing, where they really feel like this project is going to really be kind of a revitalization of not just that block area, but of Salt Lake City's downtown as a whole. I believe it was a city council member who mentioned, like, before the pandemic, Salt Lake City was really a place that even people who weren't from Salt Lake City, like people from all over the state, would come for various things. And then after the pandemic, it's still kind of regaining some of that steam, and they feel like this new effort will really make Salt Lake City a place people want to come frequently for, if it's a jazz game, if it's a hockey club game, if it's a concert at a Bravenel Hall, if it's for UMOCA, things like that. It's just going to become a bigger draw, they say. And then we did have some people who were against it, like for example, former Mayor Rocky Anderson came and spoke, and he's been an opponent from this project for a while. He really was opposed to the residents not really having necessarily a vote here. He wants to hopefully lead a referendum challenging this tax increase. And he really felt like this project wouldn't create a draw for downtown as much as it would create, quote, a private fiefdom for the SCG group. And he really felt like the council wasn't listening to the community. He said that most of the community, he felt, was overwhelmingly opposed to this. And he wants to fix, essentially, what he believes was a wrong.
He says he's going to propose a referendum challenging that tax increase.
Yeah, that's something that we looked at actually a couple of months ago. I was trying to kind of find out, okay, there are people who are against this. What are kind of the mechanics of what could happen? So the short answer to that is the tax potentially could go to an election. The long answer, it would be pretty difficult, I believe. So essentially, the ballot, the arena district could go to the ballot in two ways. So the city council could have opted to put it on the ballot itself, or voters can force the issue through a petition. But I believe that would have to be pretty quick. I think that would have to be a pretty fast turnaround there. Like, you'd have to get a decent amount of signatures. You'd have to do a couple of other things that it's a 11-step process that people who follow this petition route have to go through. So, for example, like within the first 7 days of this decision, so 7 days from Tuesday of this week, 5 sponsors would need to submit an application. Like, there's a lot of different steps that it would go through. and it seems like it'd be an uphill battle.
So finally on this, Jordan, what's the timeline? When can we expect to see, I don't know, finished products, hotels, restaurants, finished Delta Center?
Yeah, of course. So we are expected to see renovations begin for the Delta Center as soon as April. About 525 million of that 900 million in public money is expected to go towards simply renovating the Delta Center. The rest of that 900 million, about 375 million, is going to investment outside of the arena. But the specific timeline for what's coming for the Delta Center is so April 2025 to October 2025. So essentially next summer. They're hoping to demolish and rebuild the North End seating bowl, add retractable seating, and then add a premium section. And then they're going to continue work from October 2025 to April 2026, but that's going to be a little bit outside of the arena. They're hoping to do a parking garage in the arena's southwest corner. And then April 2026 to October 2026, they're hoping to do another tear down and reconstruction of a seating bowl at the south end. They're going to wrap up construction on that parking garage. And then October 2026 to October 2027 will be kind of the final year of construction. October 2026 to April 2027 is going to be finishing work on the south end. And then that last summer of 2027, we'll be building a new ice floor and also a new Jumbotron. So interesting stuff.
All right. Yeah. It's apparently going forward. Jordan Miller, thanks for telling us about this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So it's time for our underplayed stories of the week. Let's start with Emily Anderson Stern. What's your underplayed story of the week?
I'd like to highlight one from Robert Gerke about the dean of BYU Law School, whose name was previously listed on the Conservative Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. And, Project 2025 is a blueprint for that a lot of conservatives are looking to if President Donald Trump wins the election.
Yeah, interesting story. You can find that at sltrib.com. Mark Eddington, what's your underplayed story of the week? Do we have you, Mark? Let's go to Jordan Miller. What's your underplayed story of the week?
Yeah, so in the midst of all this SEG stuff, there's also been a decision on some hospital buildings at the old Sears site. So I'd highly recommend reading that. It's by Tony Semerad. It basically explains that this project has been given its own green light this week. So we got the SEG district, and we should get potentially a new hospital district at the old Sears.
Yeah.
Tom,
all right. Very good. Mark, yes, what's your underplayed story?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute my mic there.
Okay.
Well, jokingly, I would say it's canyon tree frogs. I'm writing about those for the Open Lands newsletter.
All right.
Seriously, I think the Andrew Larson's piece on the religious divide between Latter-day Saints and non-Latter-day Saints, and the number that support Trump and non-Latter-day Saints who overwhelmingly support Democrats. I think that's interesting in light of the international, or the church, seems to be going more moderate, but the members seem to be going more conservative. So anyway. All
right. Check that out, sltrib.com as well. Well, you've been listening to Behind the Headlines. We've had some great reporters with us. State Watch reporter Emily Anderson Stern, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
Thank you. Reporter Mark Eddington has been with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And reporter Jordan Miller, thank you.
Always appreciate it, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for listening. This has been Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Hope you'll join me again next time.